All right, we're live. This is awesome. Hi, welcome everyone to today's session. I'm your moderator, Claire Kerr, Director of Business Development at Care2, and I am very excited to chat about the power of email marketing, especially in these days after Black Friday, Giving Tuesday, when we saw so much interesting activity in our promotions folders, you Gmail fans out there. So just for some housekeeping for the format today, we're going to kick off with a panel discussion. And during that time, we would love to collect your questions. So please go ahead and chat them in the chat box on the left or the right, depending on where my box is in relation to your chat box. And then we will share them with the experts a little later in the session. And speaking of our experts, please join me in welcoming Karen Kirchhoff, founder and president of K2D Strategies. Hi, Karen. And Ryan Miller, partnerships director, Point Blank Creative. Hello, Ryan. How are you? And Laura Cole, director of account services at Nike Communications. Hi, Laura.
Hi there.
And also Henry McKembe, CEO of Do Big Things. Welcome, Henry.
Hello, everybody.
Hi. I feel like Andy Cohen doing a Housewives reunion, but you've all equally got the best seat on the couch. So welcome. And that's a joke for all you Bravo fans watching. Okay, so I just want to start off by throwing this out to the panel. And I know everyone's got an opinion on this one, but I'm sure that you hear quite a lot from charities and nonprofits and the professionals you talk to that they're worried about the number of emails that they're sending out, whether they're not sending enough because they see the top performing organizations with a lot of emails, or they're worried, they had one donor call them and say, hey, we got too much email. So I really want to know here, maybe this is a bit of a controversial question, but do you think that organizations are at risk of under communicating or over communicating? What's your opinion on what's going out there, what's happening in the sector? I'm going to throw it out there.
I think under communicating, honestly, there is so much noise in everybody's inbox that if you're not in front of people on a regular basis, somebody else is going to be, and you have the greater risk of missing out on whether that's engagement, advocacy on a particular issue, or fundraising, frankly. So I think the risk is more under communicating than over communicating.
I agree. Can I jump in here? I want to plus one what Karen just said. Totally agree. Obviously, all nonprofit and political organizations are up against commercial organizations. So there's I don't think the question is really fair to say, like, are organizations over communicating? Because we know that we're up against all kinds of other emails coming in. The other thing that I want to say is when it comes to is it too many? Is it not enough? I think the question, I understand the value of the question, and I certainly know that boards, EDs, presidents, and VPs ask this question, so they want a kind of literal answer, but it's a bit misleading. I mean that respectfully, because I think the truth is it absolutely just depends on the organization that we're talking about and the health, the list health, and the metrics and analytics of that organization. So it is quite possible that for an organization that typically has kind of like one big moment in a year, that if they were to send 6 emails a week, it would be too many, and they would be able to determine that based on the list health, specifically metrics and analytics of their list. But in my 16 or something years of professional experience, typically organizations have a number of moments, a number of events, a number of opportunities, a number of issues that where it makes sense for them to speak to their audience, and therefore a number of emails make sense in any, whatever the cadence is, month, week, quarter. And so the question isn't so much like, what's the one number? It's not a black and white question. It's more, what's the right number of emails based on like unsubscribing, list churn, retention, and all those other kind of like important metrics.
Laura, I saw you nodding when Ryan mentioned list health. And I know that that's one of those things that when you come to a new client or you're working with a new organization, and you're sort of thinking about how can I improve or optimize email, that's got to be a concern. And do you have any thoughts about how do you even determine the optimum health of a file?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest issues that any email marketer is going to be dealing with is list health and deliverability. I think that's one of the biggest threats that we all face, is making sure that you're actually reaching people's inboxes. And I think very often if you're looking at metrics and they're lower than they should be and you don't know why, it's almost always there's something going on with your list health. And so that's almost always the first thing we go to, is kind of doing a deeper dive on deliverability, looking at everything you can in your email platform. Are your obviously looking at your bounces, but also are your open rates kind of where they should be? Are your click rates where they should be? Really sort of deep diving, between the email providers. Are you seeing a much lower open rate on Gmail than you are on AOL? Sort of identifying sort of provider, like what might be going on that's dragging your numbers down, and then dealing with it proactively. I think that's a something that I think keeps everyone up at night on, especially those big days, is am I going to have sort of a list health deliverability issue? So I think that's really important, and that's why sort of investing in list health on validations is always worth spending money on, and even going above and beyond. And if this is if you're having issues, looking at some of those third-party tools, looking at Google Postmaster, looking at some of the sort of list health products out there can absolutely be worth any amount of money. I mean, the benchmarks on what organizations are losing out in terms of dollars, in terms of clicks, in terms of advocacy response due to deliverability is I think a lot higher than anyone thinks. So it's I always say it's like the most boring and most technical thing that email marketers have to deal with, but it's perhaps the most important, because if you're not reaching your constituents, it really doesn't matter what you're sending. You can spend all the time in the world on a beautiful and engaging email, and if it goes to someone's spam box, then it really doesn't matter.
When you mentioned metrics there, it really struck me how that's one of the things that I find creates the most anxiety with some of the organizations that I talk to. It causes the most anxiety for me personally. I'm not I'm a liberal arts major, so I'm like, wow, okay, numbers, so many things to quantify, so many things to track. I would love to know what this group's opinion is on what's valuable to track and what maybe is a little bit misleading. I think that we're all kind of aware that there are new challenges with tracking things like open ranks to changes with iOS and all of that. So I would really like to know, if you were going to advise somebody, what should they be keeping an eye on when they're looking at the success of their communications, or on that quantifiable side? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
This is Henry just jumping in here. I think that's a great point. I couldn't agree more with my fellow panelists here, both in terms of numbers and in terms of the boring stuff being the important things. I think one of the reports that we should think about is, what is the long-term value of an email? Right? I think it is not an easy report that any of the existing platform are producing, right off the top of my head, but it is a report that is, I think, important to an organization. I think when you're talking about reporting, you should be also looking at trends. So right, so those two things mixed together, as I think, tell a broader story than just a single report or a single metric, right? I think I am actually moving away from telling people to be data driven and telling them more to be data informed, right? Let the data be the beginning of what that story is being told, and then go dive in deeper and figure out what the context is. And I think reports that are about trends, as opposed to just one thing here, is, I think, more important. So if your open rate has always been hovering between 19 and 20% over the last 12 months, and today you're at 19.7 and 18.5 the day after that, it's not really a big deal, right? But if you're at 13% and all of a sudden you're at 19%, yeah, go back and say, what did we do right? And if you're at 25% and then you're being ooh, we're at 18% for the last couple cents, then you should go back and say, what are we doing? What's happening? Let's dig into our deliverability. Let's dig into that, right? So I wouldn't say that it's a specific metric on that, but I think it's accumulating those metrics over a period of time. So you're seeing trends and then using those trends to make informed decision. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but I think that's where folks should be going towards.
I love that
Definitely.
answer. Oh, sorry, I don't know who I cut off. I'll just keep talking. I love that answer.
You just nodding and agreeing.
Yeah, no, and I especially love, we talk about, I'm a fundraiser by training, right? Like I grew up in politics, quickly made the jump to fundraising for nonprofits. So, the thing that I'm always going to be looking at is revenue and how direct response programs in general, and of course, email specifically, can help drive revenue. And we talk a lot about being data, but I love the notion of being data informed, because, especially in the world that we're operating in today, and frankly, this has always been true of digital channels, they're constantly changing and evolving, right? And so the fact that reading open rates right now is becoming increasingly difficult because of changes to, how Apple and the iOS client impacts our ability to read those numbers. This notion of reading value metrics and revenue generating metrics and how those translate into program performance speaks to me as a fundraiser, because I think that's really, at the end of the day, yes, email can do lots and lots of things. It can help brand, it can drive engagement, it can help steward your donors and your prospects and cultivate them, et cetera. But at the end of the day, I'm a fundraiser and I'm interested in how much money I can generate for that cause. And so looking at and starting to move the needle, much in the way, frankly, the direct mail world looks at value. I think the digital world should and could start moving in that direction, especially given the landscape that we are navigating today.
Wait, are we allowed to say good things about direct mail? I didn't know that.
My precious direct mail. I'm starting to get some great holiday catalogs in the mail now. Karen, mentioning the metric side, and Henry, having mentioned long-term value, I sort of want to put together what Karen was saying about fundraising and what Henry was saying about long-term value, in that I think sometimes folks don't realize that having someone active on your email list or having someone just engaged in reading your content does have that potential long-term value down the road. Does anyone on the panel have an example of how they've either measured or successfully seen someone who was engaged through email, then coming in through another channel, maybe direct mail, or maybe phone, or sort of having that kind of extra touch point had a great result down the road? Oh, there have been no results of long-term value.
Well, I was kind of holding back, but I've got sort of lots of examples over the years. Telemarketing, which I think in some ways is like the ugly redheaded stepchild of the direct response world, which is I kind of got my start after politics. I went into telemarketing, and that was my avenue in. So I still hold telemarketing in regard in comprehensive direct response fundraising programs. Telemarketing tends to be, in my opinion, the best tool for migrating donor behavior between channels. And I'm for the purposes of this, kind of grouping digital as one channel, which it is not. Mail, direct mail, frankly, I would not generally use it for digital only people, because they just tend not to convert, or it's more difficult to measure because you're essentially driving them back to the web. And unless you've got the structure and the setup in place, you're going to have a hard time measuring those results. And ultimately, direct mail is a more costly channel. But within digital channels, those email folks absolutely need to be remarketed and retargeted, because that's really where a lot of the value is going to come from. Donors and constituents, prospects are not single channel, right? None of us are single channel people. You all are just saying like, oh, I'm getting some good catalogs in the mail. But if you can't order from a catalog off of an envelope, or even really calling an 800 number anymore, right? You use the catalog and then you go online and you place your order. That's how our world works. So none of us are single channel people. Our donors and our prospects and our constituents are not single channel people. And we need to be talking to them and be in front of them in multiple channels. So whether that's email and Facebook, or email and display, or email and telemarketing, maybe. Woo! I think that there's this need, this requirement that we're in front of folks where they are when they're in those places.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would
couldn't
also
agree more.
add to I would
No,
also
go
add
ahead.
to that mobile and texting.
Yeah.
And I think that we're certainly seeing in the last couple of years, the last couple of election cycles, texting like just exploding in terms of importance as like, if like to your point, Karen, like in terms of like if we're calling all of this digital under like the very, very large umbrella of digital. Mobile and texting specifically also very much is part of this, like we're not one channel humans approach and lens. And I think that texting is also one of these fantastic opportunities that like you don't want to overuse, but when you have a great email list and you can get mobile numbers, some often from the email list, often from other sources, but it's a mutually beneficial ecosystem, right? To email those folks, text them potentially with some sort of offer. Maybe it's time sensitive, maybe it's an event, who knows? And you keep them informed and engaged on the email list, but the texting kind of tends to have an overall net benefit result. Yeah, Henry, over to you.
Yeah, I think we have found we work with a labor organization out west, and what we did is we found that like if we take our email list, they had target prospects we're trying to do membership, and we ran this last year. We actually split it in two. We did an A/B test, right? And we took a certain half of that list and we uploaded it to Facebook, and we targeted them with ads, and then we followed those ads with email communication. Right. And on the flip side, we just want email communications for the other group. Right. What we saw is that the folks that had both the Facebook ads being targeted with them, then followed up with an email, with an email list, had a higher level of membership sign up. Right. So just to Karen's point, right, we're all multi-channel. Right. So we certainly should be doing that. I think this is a song that I've been singing for a while, but like a lot of the organizations that we work with are not set up to manage the data that way, right? They don't have a data layer that allows the membership folks to talk to the advocacy folks, to talk to the fundraising folks. So you never really have a full 360 or more view of the folks that you're talking to, right? So it's hard to then calculate the long-term value across channels, because truthfully, they just don't have the infrastructure to be able to do that on a number of basis, right? And I see that as a consumer, right? University of Maryland mails me stuff. I have given to University of Maryland via the internet on the same day for the last 10 years. Why I am still getting mail is completely doesn't make sense to me, right? So that means to me, there's somebody there who's not thinking through like, hey, let's look at Henry's history for the last 10 years. He's only given us to us online. He opened us our email, and we're not getting any feedback from the mailer. Or the mailer should be, hey, remember to give us on this date, as opposed to like, please mail this back, right? And it's because they don't have the infrastructure to do that. So while multi-channel is great, it's only at this point I've seen it work the best just within digital and not really wrapping in the other folks. And that is something that, to be more effective moving forward, that organization are going to have to address. So
I would love to just, I'm gonna jump in and defend direct mail a little bit. I think, particularly in the political sphere, I do think that the mail is a bit underused. I think it has to be, to Henry's point, you have to be mailing smart. I think you should know, okay, if all of these folks are coming in on a digital channel, you're not going to be looking at a heavy direct mail cycle. But at the same time, mail, there's something that lingers about mail in a way that email doesn't. Email's in, email's out. People are going to see a few, but there's a lot of emails coming in. Mail is really an opportunity where people are going to get a bit more content, and it is going to sort of sit in someone's house. And I think that particularly things like a postcard, even like an oversized postcard, I think can kind of cut through some of the digital chatter, particularly in email, and sort of make you stand out. And I think it is something that's underutilized in the political space. I think, political season starts to roll around and everyone's getting, a million emails from every candidate. If you're the one with a direct mail letter out there, I do think that can be engaging. Now, again, if this audience is digital, then maybe they don't get as many direct mail packages, especially if they're not responding. So I think you do need to be smart and say, okay, these are the people where we've gotten some response. But I think just because someone isn't necessarily responding in the mail doesn't mean that there's no value to it.
It's so
I agree with
difficult.
that. I think what I would say is like, can we do that smart mail? Like, right? So for example, if I give you a certain donation, a personalized thank you card, like which like University of Maryland in this case, I keep using it, has done. Like they sent me, I gave to a scholarship fund, they sent me a thank you card from somebody who's actually taking advantage of scholarship. Like that was effective, right? But the ask in the mail to do that again is not. And I think that smart mail approach makes the most sense. And having that daily layer to tie it all up together, I think that makes sense. But I agree with you that like every channel should be taken advantage of, including mail, including phones, and including TV even.
Yeah. I think that with direct mail, I also definitely see the value, but I think for the last, I don't know, 10, maybe even 15 years, direct mail has been moving more or less away from a quantitative play to a qualitative play. To your point, Henry, about like a personalized letter from a scholarship recipient. And Laura, to your point about like it really depends on what you get. I love direct mail as like part of an omni-channel kind of ecosystem for premiums and for the kind of like bigger, thicker, tactile. Once the relationship has been established, typically like basically usually through email, because that's kind of like communications headquarters. You can follow up with like a bigger package, like something where there's like back and forth, like a dynamic relationship instead of just one way, top down. I think direct mail is really, really valuable in that way. But I also agree with you, Henry, that like one of the huge challenges is that most organizations don't have the digital infrastructure to properly measure the actual relationship between offline and online channels. Like we can come close. Sometimes we can get at some metrics, but there's very, very few organizations, in my experience, that can actually kind of do the deep dive analysis and also see the bigger picture, and who kind of invests in staff time in order to like take that data and then be, to your point, Henry, data informed, right? So like how many mailings should we be sending? To what extent are mailings influencing online donors and online donations, right? Like you consider yourself an online donor to the University of Maryland. It'd be really interesting to test what kind of anything tactile you get in the mail, like any kind of mailing, whether it's a package, a letter, a postcard, magnet, whatever, testing those things to see their efficacy as opposed to treating these channels as if they're in direct opposition to each other. I think we're getting better at that, but like, I've spent my entire career like from a kind of like I sort of grew up digital and have had the digital but very omni-channel friendly lens. And I feel like I've spent like 15, 16 years explaining to direct mail focused fundraisers and people, I'm not your enemy. It's a matter of like the right investment that meets the goals and like strategic targets that you have as an organization and that make the most sense for your actual audience. That's it. It's like it's putting the puzzle together. It's not like duke it out who's going to win.
Duke it out who's going to win. I love that. I also love the direct mail discussion. One of the hallmarks of direct mail is, we all know, because it's so expensive, we have to extensively test it, right? And I think sometimes there's this perception in the industry, or just that with digital marketing, testing is so easy to do because it doesn't cost us that much and we can change things on the fly. But we all know how difficult it is to do, to test all of our communication. So I want to throw out there to the group, what are your thoughts on what we should be testing? I've seen too many organizations try to change 20 different things in every email, different subject line and a different call to action and different send times and all of that. What is valuable when it comes to testing for email?
So I can start here. I think always first priority, when you're building a program, kicking off a campaign, is going to be your frontline and subject line. I think at the end of the day, if you're not getting strong open rates, if someone isn't opening a communication, it really doesn't matter what's inside, because they're not going to see it if they're not opening it. So I do think that frontline, subject line, preview tactics are sort of always the the number one thing to start testing and optimizing. Just because, again, I think you want to get in front of your people. Like opening that email is sort of the most important threshold to getting, whether it's donations, whether it's, someone signing a petition, whether it's giving them information about, going to vote, anything like that. You got to get in front of them, and that's going to be the key from my perspective is that, tacking on sort of send times. Although I do think from a send time standpoint, if you can do it based on, individual behavior, I think that's always going to be the best, is saying, okay, this individual, doing sort of send time optimization, a lot of platforms do support that. I think that's always going to be better than saying like 10 a.m. on Tuesdays is best for my list, is when you can say this individual is a morning person and this individual is an evening person, and doing it sort of at the individual level, that's always going to be the best. But yeah, I would say form and subject line are always going to be sort of number one. And then from there saying, okay, we've done some optimization here, these are our strongest performing, pieces of content there, then you can really start to work on things like click-through rate.
I love when retailers do that to me when, they realize that I'm reading all of their emails at 2:30 in the morning, and so that they should get me to buy things at 2:30 in the morning. I'm like, brilliant, awesome. Now one of the nonprofits going to start soliciting donations that way. Perfect. So another, in terms of testing, I'd love to know thoughts on evocative and powerful call to action items. And I know a lot of this is going to come down to the nature of the organization that's doing the call to action and the nature of the target audience. But if you can't say what's the best way to do it, any thoughts on bad call to actions or ineffective call to actions or things that you think are a little bit outdated to see in email? Nobody wants to smack talk any bad emails they got on Giving Tuesday. I can tell you one thing, I got about 1 million emails that said, it's Giving Tuesday. And then the preview text was, Dear Claire, it's Giving Tuesday. So I felt that wasn't maybe the most useful email that I could receive on. Oh, everyone's laughing. Maybe, no, none of your clients would have done an email like that. It's so interesting you're talking about testing subject lines. I'm hoping to see a few more people testing out that kind of preview language, right? Because I feel like I do a lot of triage that way. And sometimes if it's, alt text and weird stuff there, I'm just not, compelled to open things. And I know that we always want to get people to take an action. So any thoughts on really effective ways to get people to take that action?
So well, I'm going to jump in because I want to be slightly contrary on the testing and email conversation. I see so much evolution in such a short amount of time in digital channels generally, but even specifically on email, that I'm honestly not a huge fan of testing in sort of singular communications. I mean, I'm going to jump back to what Henry said a couple of minutes ago, that this is a place where I actually think looking at trends is a lot more valuable. If you whenever you use a particular signer, you get better open rates, or the particular signer doesn't get better open rates, then that trend data I think is helpful. But A/B testing on senders or on subject lines, unless you have a really large file and can do, like a 10-10-80, right? Where you do 10% of the file gets one, 10% of the file gets the other, and 12 hours later you send out whichever one worked better. The testing in and of itself might be interesting, but I don't know that it really can drive strategy. Looking at trending, however, I think is a different conversation. Again, sender subject lines, the capturing attention and getting people to open and ultimately click is really our number one job. And I think Laura is 100% right that like your first challenge is that email envelope and making sure that it's engaging enough to get people in it. But then once they're in, you still have to keep their attention, whatever the call to action is, whether it's a survey or a petition or asking for a donation, sending a card, right? Any and all of those are the kinds of engagement that we need to keep people's eyeballs on.
So I don't actually think you're that controversial, because I think I was headed in that direction. I think Laura is absolutely right in terms of like getting eyeballs there, right? But I think I would take it a step further. Is like, do you have a big enough list to conduct any sort of meaningful tests? Like, right? Because the number of people that have a list of 5,000 people and are trying to A/B test, and I'm like, I don't know that that's statistically significant to be meaningful, like, right? Like, to base any sort of decision on. So I think you have to take a step back and really try to be like, do we have a big enough list to test, right? And then you have to create a testing schedule so you avoid this knee-jerk reaction on a specific test results, right? We're going to be taking the next 3 months to focus on senders, like, right? We're going to be testing senders so we can build a trend to see what the senders are. We're going to take the next month, we're going to do it over 10 emails, and we're going to, we're going to A/B test over 10 emails. And then at the end of that month, 2-month period, we're going to draw some sort of conclusion, right? And then using that to then, okay, we're going to test preview in the next 2 months, like, right? And then go from that, right? And I think if you take that approach, you're kind of taking the best of both worlds, like, right, where you're speaking to what Laura is saying is like, how are we getting in front of these people? Are we getting at the opening or stuff? But you're also taking advantage of what Karen is saying, being like, are we looking at trends overall? Like, right? So actually creating a testing schedule where you are testing specific things over a certain period of time, over several emails, it also gets you over the hurdle. Is my list big enough or small enough or meaningful enough to get there? Right? And you're looking back at it quarterly or monthly or whatever makes sense, depending on your send volume, I think is much more important than any specific test, because we've seen all sorts of things work for all sorts of clients, right? We've sent what I would consider to be like the single ugliest email on earth, and it's performed well. And the prettiest email on earth was like, but then on the flip side, another client, the exact opposite happened. Yeah. And so I'm just like, I don't know. I know that's not the right answer, but it's like, I want to look at your list. I want to look at what you're doing, and I want to help you better, over time, right? And that's what this is all about. So you can deliver value for the organization and for your advocates and supporters.
I think all of those are really good points, and to maybe kind of like level it up one dimension. I think what I see missing a lot is, like, for years I feel like I and many of us talked about how, like, digital basically kind of like needed a strategic approach. We needed a digital strategy. Sometimes that turned into more and more an actual kind of written and live document that was like shared, understood, and bought into at the leadership level. And I think that where we are now is email needs its own strategy, like obviously kind of connected to digital and connected to a number of programs and departments within every organization. But the main idea is we know how important email is, and yet and most organizations tend to have one to a number of staff people who manage it and who are on top of things like, to Karen's point, trends, and to Henry's point, like, what is worth testing in the first place, and to Claire's question, like, like testing too many things, not testing enough, like. The email really, we're at a stage in 2021, almost 2022, where I think there needs to be somebody at an organization who's accountable for an actual strategy and plan for a year, maybe even 18 months, that includes things like, what do we, this upcoming year, what do we want to test? What are the results that we're trying work towards or reach? How do those dial up into the strategic plan, or like the larger digital plan, the larger strategic plan, et cetera, whatever those look like? And what things aren't worth testing this year at all? Like, is it an election year? Is it not an election year? Those things are like, obviously it depends on the organization, but they might be, you can't just look at, like, 2020 versus 2019 because of some of the variables like that, or natural disasters, whatever else is going on in the world. And so I think that we can get really, really lost in what things should we test, how many things should we test. I think it's like typically very much a mistake to test more than one thing at once. I don't know why organizations either don't test at all or seem to test way too much. And that sort of thing is an indicator, typically, in my experience, of a lack of a larger strategic attention and focus and lens to email and its actual value. Like I'm such a believer in email. Like email is like the headquarters, the central place. We are always so focused on acquisition. We don't spend enough time on retention and relationship building and maintenance. And we know those emails turn into donors, volunteers, boots on the ground, digital organizers. Like we know the value. And yet most organizations don't have, it can be a page and a half, it can be 20 pages, but most organizations don't spend the kind of strategic planning time ahead of time to say, what is our vision for email and how it serves organizational goals for the upcoming year? And then what can we do to work towards that in terms of the plan? And I would say in terms of the plan piece of it, I think it might be a great idea for organizations to say, like, we'll test one thing every month or whatever it is. Like, we'll give ourselves 1 week to think about it, 1 week to like put together the test, 1 week to do the test, 1 week to analyze. We'll gather up those 12 months of results that will help inform next year's plan, or something along these lines. But I think the main idea is there's a lot of conversation around the cost to acquire an email address, the long-term value of the email, testing versus not testing, what should we be testing, et cetera. And these things need to be gathered together with a kind of like strategic thread that keeps them together and gives them a focus and vision.
I like that you brought forward the importance of someone having ownership over that relationship. Yeah. Through email or through other channels, and just sort of looking at what they're going to be doing for the year. I saw this really disturbing survey that I was sharing with my students, and it was something like 50% of nonprofit communications professionals don't have a formalized or written communications plan for the year. Like they haven't really thought about what they're going to say to folks, and a certain percentage of those were like, it's all in my head, or I kind of know what I'm going to say, but I haven't written it down. So I know that one of the tools or one of the tactics that can help a strategy for communicating with your supporters is putting together, for new folks, a welcome journey or a new supporter journey. Is any kind of automated communications that you can kind of set up. Is this still a valuable practice for organizations, or do you think that this is a little bit outdated and we shouldn't be forcing everyone through one pipeline? I'd really like to know your thoughts on that, because I do see organizations struggle to even just put together one automated series,
Yes. You need a welcome series. You've got to onboard people. That their initial decision to sort of join your organization was likely a moment in time, and reinforcing that good decision is critical. That is the job of a welcome series, in my opinion. Frankly, I also think a job of a welcome series is to try to convert some of those folks to donors as quickly as possible if they are not already donors. But giving them opportunities to engage with you and reminding them of why they took that initial action to begin with is critical. Otherwise, the time and the money and the energy that you spent going out to acquire that new email address is going to end up in the trash can.
I just want to throw in one more story before I go back to the panel, because this one really struck me. So I teach a digital strategies course at George Brown College here in Toronto, and one of the assignments students have in the first week is to give their email address to 3 charities, either sign up for their newsletter or just give them their email on the website. And 6 weeks later, most students have heard nothing from the organizations that they signed up for. And the shock, yeah, like they're all so shocked. They're like, oh my gosh, how could they not? I gave them my precious data, I gave it to them. Where's the relationship? And it's funny because I think that they hadn't really considered that they had done that transaction and had received nothing in return until it was pointed out to them. And a lot of them work for organizations that have not put anything in place to build that relationship. So if any of my students are watching this, guys, I feel for you.
Yeah, I think I 100% agree with what Karen said there. I think the 2 things I would point out is the welcome series is also an opportunity for you to learn more about the folks that you're bringing onto your list. I think a lot of organizations who have a welcome series set up do a decent job of telling the organizational story, but then miss the opportunity to learn more about this new person that has joined their community. So that is one thing that I would just like to put a flag on is when you're looking at your welcome series, do you have series points of inputs so that this new person that is part of your community get to share a little bit about themselves, and that then that allows you to use that for future communication and tailor it a little bit better, right? I think that is I think a point that I'd like to make there. And then the second thing is that welcome series that you wrote 2 years ago, maybe just like have a seat, take a look at it again, make sure it's still relevant and present, because it's great that you set it up 2 years ago, but just consider taking a couple of hours and making sure that it's still valid. Just consider it.
I think that's a great point.
I definitely think that organizations don't spend enough time or energy doing this. Like, imagine going on like a first date or a blind date and then not texting or calling and liking the person and wanting to engage in some kind of ongoing relationship or at least another date, and not communicating with that person. I mean, organizations literally invest a lot of money in acquisition, and then there's like typically just a like substantially less thoughtfulness and strategy in terms of actually retaining these people, keeping them on, like onboarding them, retaining them, etc. I also think that when it comes to email welcome series, is for those organizations who do them, very glad that they do them. I think I'm familiar, I'm friends with a lot of folks who work at organizations who do care about the email welcome series and do test things over time, I'm happy to say. But I think one of the interesting opportunities now in 2021 is to try and see to what extent in the email welcome series, this is not limited to the email welcome series, but it within the kind of confines of the email welcome series, how you are communicating with your new audience. And I think Henry just pointed out, it tends to be like the organizations tend to focus on the organizational voice and sharing. And typically these emails tend to be very kind of top down, one directional communications. And I think the opportunity for 2021, but certainly for 2022 and beyond, is to like basically throw that out, turn it upside down, try and figure out don't worry so much about the organizational voice, but actually what's important to these people who have just signed up, and what's the kind of relationship, what's the value you think that they're getting out of it. And I think that one of the interesting specific opportunities is to try and have less of an institutional and frankly colonial voice, and to try and learn about community-centric fundraising, and to try and use some of the principles kind of like translated into email and an email welcome series, but all email, to focus on folks in the community, folks being served, the audience having a relationship with the people being served, instead of this centrality of the institution, the organization. I think we have an opportunity to kind of like make these emails welcome series and all of them less hierarchical, less one-dimensional, less one-directional, less top-down. And so that can manifest in terms of like the email sender, right? Like, who's the email from? That can manifest by way of like some sort of survey or question that focuses on the new subscriber and the people or issue being served, as opposed to the organization as like the main kind of like vehicle or like central authority figure. It's really about kind of like building this like multi-dimensional relationship instead of just this top-down relationship. So I see that as like an opportunity for a shift in focus that I think will really help new subscribers to actually feel connected to the organization. They know the organization is really just kind of a vehicle. No, it's not the destination.
I do think that you really are building a relationship, and I think that's a point a number of people have made here. And I think, one of the things that's important there too is that, it is really this getting to know you phase. And I think a lot of times what happens is, there'll be a singular, welcome series. Now, obviously that's better than no welcome series, but I think, everyone would be well served by having different versions of the welcome series that relate back to the point of acquisition. If someone came in as a donor, I think they need to be welcomed very differently than if they just, go to a website or sign up, or if they, sign a petition to come in, or if it's a paid media strategy. Ultimately what you're doing is building a relationship with the organization, the candidate. But I think that it does need to have some versioning to it so that the relationship is starting off on the right foot, and it's starting off in a way that's going to feel relevant to that constituent and the way that they first engage with the organization. So while yes, having one is important, but I think also saying, like, if I'm doing a big paid media buy, I'm getting, a whole bunch of names coming in from this one petition, I want to make sure that I'm bridging that initial point of contact in that original, say, issue area or topic, and I'm bridging that to the ongoing communications that they're going to get. I think the disconnect there will absolutely disserve, sort of that long-term value.
One thing that I'd like to see, and I couldn't agree more, what was just there, but like one thing I'd like to see is like we have automation. Like let's marry that with the data trends that we're seeing. So if we know that we're losing subscribers after 18 months, right? At months 16 and 17, do we have another series that's saying, hey, you've been with us for X amount of time. What do you think? What do you want to see differently, right? We're, again, talking about being data informed and trying different things and being there. Like the welcome series at the beginning, great. But what about in the middle? Like, where are you linking your folks and what are you putting there to help, get that? We know that emails go bad after X amount of years. Like, are you reminding folks to update their email address with you, right? So I think, the welcome series at the beginning is great, but also when you're looking at your data overall, like, and you're doing your lifetime value reports, where are you seeing drop off? Is that those are the places to re-engage? Like, right, we've talked about, a lot of organizations are talking about like relapse donor, but to Ryan's point about retention, are you using automated series to do better retention and using the data to inform when those retention points should be happening? That's something I'd love to see moving forward. See some more organization do.
Yeah, the technology,
especially for lapse donor reactivation. That, like, Henry, that's a great point. There should be a separate, completely different kind of, not a welcome series, but a retention series, basically to try and re-engage lapse donors and subscribers.
You took me right into my next question, which was going to be, we've spent so much time talking about, and Henry, you had mentioned ugly emails, pretty emails, we're talking about the content and what we're putting in front of the eyeballs that are seeing, but what about the saddest scenario, the lapsed subscribers, the inactive folks? What can we do? At one point, they loved us. At one point, there was an affinity match there. They had the same values as our organization. What can we do to reactivate people who've gone inactive? I love the idea of almost minority reporting it and kind of thinking how they might go inactive. Let's put them in a series to make sure that they don't. But what do we do when we know that they're gone? It's a sad question.
Do we know that they're gone? I mean, first let's make sure. What are they?
Why did they leave me?
But I mean, I think we don't pay enough attention to this sort of thing. Like there's just like altogether so much energy focused on acquisition. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but this, like, it just drops off. And when it comes to retention, and I just think that retention should be part of the strategy, basically, and like reactivation should be part of the strategy. I think there's just pretty simple tactical opportunities to test different like kind of like dormant and lapsed segments. Some more personal, some more issue-based, like some from the leader, et cetera. And that we all know, especially those of us, those of us who come from a fundraising background, who are like tend to be kind of hyper-focused on the ROI, that it is cheaper to retain a donor and subscriber than it is to go out and get a new one. And so that it simply needs to be part of the ongoing strategy. And back to our very first conversation about kind of list health. I think that this is a really critical indicator.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first place my head goes when this question bubbles up. It's not so much, there's lots of great tactics you can use for getting people to click and open emails, and that's fine. I think this panel would be happy to share some of what they've done on that front. I think this is really a question about list hygiene because, to your point, are they really gone, or are they just not getting your emails because they're getting buried, or because they're ending up in a spam folder? and going back and revisiting how you're managing your file. How are you prioritizing sends? How are you, ranking to make sure that you're getting eyeballs on your content is first and foremost where I think this conversation needs to go when we're talking about lapsed and unengaged people. And then the second place, frankly, or maybe this should be the first place, is about how broadly speaking you are on an ongoing basis engaging and cultivating and stewarding your constituents and your donors, right? If you're treating them as ATM machines, I'm a fundraiser, by the way, right? Like I want to raise as much money as possible from the constituents that our clients have access to, but our constituents and donors are not ATM machines. And if all you're ever doing is going after them and asking for money, they're going to stop paying attention because they don't always have money to give you. We need to give folks other things to do, whether that's sign petitions or engage in surveys and create that two-way communication that Henry was talking about. There's lots of even sending out cards, right? Whether it's a candidate's birthday or, giving the file something to do other than give money is critical. And I can't underscore that enough.
I think that's absolutely true. Go for it.
No, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, I think, that yes to all of that, but I also think that, we as marketers, as fundraisers, as people running campaigns, I think we also have to know when to let go, because I think the easiest way to sort of tank the engaged part of your file is to say like, but I have 1 million names on my file and let me just email all of them and we'll see what happens. Like, I think that's the easiest way to lose touch with the engaged people, is to hold on to people that are gone, that are for one reason or another, they're, the email is bad or they're just not engaged anymore. That, the priority always has to be, maintaining contact with your most engaged people. And so it is that really careful balance of like giving people those chances to engage, obviously, definitely beyond fundraising, and, letting them know, hey, this is going to be your last email from us, making sure that they do raise their hand if they're still engaged. But if they're really done, you have to let them go, and just be really smart and strategic with reactivation efforts, because trying to hold on to them is what's going to get you into trouble with deliverability. And then you can't reach anybody.
Continue to use that dating analogy. It's like trying to keep one to an ex. Sometimes it's just there's a reason they left the first time. I think for me, it comes down to a little bit more data, right? I think to Laura's point, like if somebody's been on a list for a while and they haven't really taken any action and then they stop participating, yeah, it's time to let that go. But if somebody once gave $1,000, like, right, that's also when the multi-channel, approach can be helpful. Write them a personal note, follow up with a phone call, like, right, if they once gave $1,000 or they were a subscriber, they're a monthly donor for, a period of 12 months or more, like something had to have happened, right? And so in that case, I think it's worth investing a little bit more time to find that out. But somebody who just signed up once and opened a couple of emails and hasn't done more, like, right, like, yeah, it just wasn't a good first date, like, right, let's move on, right? So I think this is where, again, being data informed makes a little more sense, like, right, somebody was giving you $60 a month for 12 months, for 12 years, or whatever it is, like, they deserve a phone call, honestly, to just say, are you okay? Right? And so I think segmentation can help kind of inform what you do in that case, and to figure out what would be the best outcome for both you and your list.
I also think that you made an interesting point about segmentation. I also think there's a bit of a kind of like dark side to segmentation. And so I've seen some lists that do a good job of focus on donor journey, focus on like different donor profiles and identities, and then do so much segmentation that they end up having certainly lapsed and inactive folks, and they don't do the follow-up work of like, well, maybe they've been segmented either inaccurately or their actual desires and the issues they care about have changed and evolved. So they're like, so I see instances of this, like, yeah, segmentation is a best practice. Okay, we've done it, as if it's a one-time event, as opposed to treating segmentation as a kind of like like evolving thing, right? Like that like a plant that actually needs to be watered again and again, not just one time. Because I think there are cases where like segmentation is actually like the root of an inactive or lapsed donor, and like that alone could actually kind of like shift the conversation entirely. But I also think that like the reason that doesn't happen is both this kind of like lack of strategic emphasis and buy-in, and also staff, right? Like we can talk about all these things, we've got all the tactics and strategies, but we all know, especially those of us who work at agencies, that like it requires a human to actually do this work, and that requires their boss to value the work. So I think we're still very much in like email is still and always will be evolving, because as the strategies and tactics kind of keep changing, keep needing to change, that also has to be reflected on within the like the organizational capacity, from an organizational capacity lens as well. What we want to do, how do we need to pay a human being to help us actually do that.
I love how everyone on this panel has pointed out the importance of getting input from your supporters as opposed to just sort of blasting them out with the letter from the CEO, or so actually asking them what they're interested in is a great engagement opportunity. At Care2, we have a tool now called Cultivate that boosts retention and reactivation on an email list just by putting branded activities in front of that person. And the most popular activities are quizzes and polls where people can give their opinion on something that they care about. So I can totally see why, if we were pushing more of that sort of donor-centered, supporter-centered communication, you could expect you to have better retention and better reactivation. So I really appreciate all the thoughts that have been brought up in today's panel. None of them really were controversial, but I like that you try to get a little spicy there. This has been a fantastic discussion, but I have to say we're coming up on the hour. So I do want to ask one final question, and it is, and please be as honest as possible, what is one thing or two things that you wish your clients were doing differently? So if you could wave that magic wand and kind of get them to change something or improve something, what's sort of the number one thing that you would like to see?
So I can start. I mean, I think there's a tendency to be afraid of risk, and I think email is a channel that really benefits from being bolder and going for it, and responding faster to things, but also just recognizing that often the most effective tactics are going to be the ones that get some complaints. And I think there's a real tendency to be like, well, last time we did that, we got some complaints, so let's not do it again, rather than saying we did it. A few people complained, but we got some of the best engagement metrics. Like, let's keep doing that because that's what's getting attention. So I think being a little bit bolder and a little riskier is really going to reward, people working in the email marketing space.
Any other thoughts on things you would love to see organizations do a little bit differently? It's okay if you just want to say, all my clients are perfect. And they
well,
never
all of our clients are perfect, of course. But I do want to, Henry, Ryan, I think, and Laura all make this point about better use of automation. The tools have gotten really, really good. Automation series are easier to set up. They're more intuitive on lots of the platforms that are available. Welcome series, onboarding series is certainly one way. Then I think most orgs tends to be an area where they're better about using automation. But there's a lot of other opportunities to use automation, and I would really love to see certainly our clients, but organizations in general, just do more on that front. And whether it's sort of identifying pre-lapse behavior or baking in a recurring giving ask after somebody's made a one-time gift, any and sort of all of that. And more is, I think there's a lot of missed opportunity out there to take advantage of some of the technology and the tools to really further enhance relationships between constituents and organizations.
Mine is, I mean, Ryan stole the thunder. Is like, what is your strategic plan, right? Because it allows us to make these decisions of what it's about testing, what it's about doing automation, what it's about, what is your strategic plan? Because then we can make decision based on that and align it with the organization. It's completely unsexy, but it really allows us to make decision because, as we discussed on this panel, there is like 1,000,001 things that you can do. And as far as I know, every organization is resource constrained, right? Even the biggest one that are the most well-funded, right? So if we can find a way to be strategic on a continuous basis, like, right, and not just like we have an email strategy for forever, that would be helpful. So I think from a strategic standpoint, I think that will help inform staffing, it'll help inform testing, it'll help inform risk, risk behavior, risk tolerance across the organization. It will put everybody on the same page, consultant and in-house staff, right? So if you can be more of that would be great. From a tactical level, I want to send most folks to just a basic data statistics class so we can all be reading those numbers the same way, because there's some interpretations out there.
Gaps in knowledge. 100% yes to +1 to what my co-panelists have said. And I'll add to that I think we, in all of this, we just can't, it would benefit all of us, all the organizations that we serve, to also just remember that these are human beings, that this is not a list of they're not ATMs, and an email address represents an actual human being. And all the analysis and the strategic planning are 100% critical, and all the testing and all of that is really, really important. And also, let's remember that these are human beings, and sometimes the data can't actually tell us 100%, can't tell us absolutely everything. And sometimes when we've got working with really large lists, it's even easier to kind of forget that these are human beings, and to keep in the back of our minds that we're trying to cultivate and retain relationships with actual human beings and move them up a ladder of engagement. And the further up the ladder they go, the more really it necessitates a real kind of one-to-one and human relationship. Let's just not forget that we are human beings working with and trying to develop relationships with human beings.
Speaking of human beings, I've been privileged to be chatting with 4 fantastic ones today. Thank you so much, everybody. We are at the hour. We hope that you're enjoying this webinar and that you will share the recording with your colleagues and your friends, your loved ones. Take this recording home for the holidays and show everyone the power of email marketing. I would absolutely love that. Earlier, before we started, I had said that I felt a little bit like Andy Cohen at a Housewives reunion. At the end of the reunion, they always do shots. You do tequila, have a martini. However, it's not even 11. It just turned 11 here on the East Coast, so I think I'm going to wait until at least 4:30 for anything to drink on a Friday. So, all right, Karen's already got. Everyone's got their beverages. Awesome. So thank you very much, everyone. Ryan, Laura, Karen, Henry, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time today and your expertise. This has been a fabulous webinar.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Thanks all.
It still says that we're